in the interest of hearing what you have to say and listening to you, and maybe answering some questions that you still may have. But she's really here to help us discuss this really just incredible story. And I imagine most of you have read it. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. Again, it's My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me. A Black woman discovers her family's Nazi past. It really is an incredible story. And I'm so thrilled that between Jennifer Rosenzweig and Mindy Stern, we've been able to make this possible to bring Jennifer virtually to our community. So, Jennifer, Teege, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Welcome. Warm welcome to everyone.
So it's 7:00 in Germany. It's not too late. And so let's discuss. I imagine, did everyone have a chance to read the book here?
Yes.
If you haven't, I know I see most of you saying yes. If you haven't, that's okay too. We can still discuss. So I have a couple questions I kind of wrote out myself, and a couple questions that Jennifer's publisher provided me. One of the things I enjoyed about the book was not only Jennifer reading your words, but also Nicolo Selmar's words, the historian. It kind of put things in perspective as I was reading it. And I thought that was really well done. Not only she talked about historical facts, but also kind of got into some of the personal behind the scenes stories. What did everyone think about that? Was that helpful to y'all as you kind of read the book?
It was just a different approach to writing, and I liked it.
I did too.
I really liked it as well. Also, I thought the story is it's not sequential. Like, you can't deal with, trauma in a very sequential way. So it's kind of going backwards and forwards and all around, but having to sort of be able to put a pin in it and then add this extra background was really helpful to pull all the pieces of the story together.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of liked it because it was kind of nice, like learning about history at the same time from a personal perspective and a generic perspective. Marcia?
I was just going to say, I thought that the contrast in writing was really nice. So, Jennifer, yours was more personal, and which it should be, and then the other part was just a nice contrast, a little bit more detached, as you said, Rabbi Strauss, a little more historical, slightly more removed, and I like the two pieces together.
Yeah.
Too.
Can I say something?
Please, anytime.
Okay. It's very interesting because how we decided to choose this kind of format, because my major concern in the very beginning was that I always wanted to have different voices included, not only mine, but also the people around. So, for example, how it started was that it was an article in a German magazine. It was it's a little bit like Time magazine, I would say, in the US, a political magazine, and did a long story about the family, about the history. And I decided to work with the journalist because, first of all, it's not that we knew each other privately, but I knew her by being interviewed, and I really liked her work, so I trusted her. This was the most important thing. And she also had, by providing the interview for the Stern, which is like the Time magazine, she had a lot of material because she had interviewed quite a lot of people. And therefore, I thought she might be a good partner. And so we were able, because there were so many layers. It's not just, as I always say, it's not just my story, it's such a universal story. And to have these different issues combined with the personal experience that obviously only I could share, and also the viewpoints of other people involved and the historical material. Let's say, for example, the last interview that my grandmother gave, we got the material from it was from the BBC, I think. We found it finally in the archives. So I thought to really have a complete, or you will never have a complete picture, but let's say a broader view from different angles, this would be really helpful by having these two voices or a different voice included. And yeah, I think I hope it worked. And from the resonance or the response that I got from other readers, it was, for most of them, it did work. Like you said, they didn't thought it was a distraction, but it was something that added more to the story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Jennifer, the Washington Post described the book as equal parts a memoir, an adoption story, and a geopolitical history lesson. And Jennifer, as you researched and reflected on the Goethe family, the larger history of Nazism, and your own adoption and childhood, you talked about really all three things throughout the book. Let me ask everyone first, Jennifer, before you answer. Which of the three do you think affected Jennifer the most? Her research in the Goethe family, the larger history of Nazism, or her own adoption in childhood?
The adoption.
And why do you think that, Lynn?
She had so many unanswered questions before she even was cognizant of the whole Nazi world and what had happened. And those just carried on and were magnified as she found out more and more information. But I think that was the driving force for her.
Other thoughts? Or let me phrase it another way. What was most interesting to you?
I found as I was reading, as I started getting closer to the end, I was really became very concerned about her adopted family, and I wanted to come back to them and find out kind of where it had come to. And I was so happy to see or to read that, unfortunately, obviously, around the death of her adoptive father, but that so the family really came together, and I was rooting for that. I really, really wanted for that to happen. That made me really happy. I was afraid that there was a point where that was lost, and so when we came back to it at the end, I was just so happy to read that. And I would be interested to hear, how from then to now, how was your adoptive family?
Shall I answer?
Please. And I'll dovetail what Jennifer said. I noticed that you didn't spend a lot of time talking about them. Not as much time as I thought you would.
Yes, this was due to the reasons because there was so much that needed to be told. And when you write a book, you have to structure it in a certain way. For example, my father, my Nigerian father, he doesn't, I speak about him, but very, very briefly, maybe you noticed. This is not because I don't value him enough, but this was just for a different reason, because I wanted him to keep his privacy. And I didn't want to ignore him, or I wanted him to be part of it, but I wanted to respect his privacy. This is, for example, why I didn't write about him. So about my adoptive family, I was able to write more, but you needed to see what you give importance, first of all, to tell the story that you want to tell, and then also where you put the emphasis on. And I thought it's important also to speak about the family, the adoption, because this was the first trauma, one could say. But for example, I don't know whether you remember, this is very dear to me when I talked about my other grandmother. Do you remember? I didn't talk only about Ruth Irene, my grandmother from my biological family, but also of my other grandmothers. I call them the Wiener grandmother and the Bochumer. It's two cities. It's because I cherish them very much. And okay, they're not so known, but they played such an important part in my life. And just because they are not historical facts, I didn't want it to pretend, that they had no importance in my life, because they definitely had. So it was important for me, first of all, to mention all of them, to honor them, and then to see in how far I tell their story. So for my adoptive family, I thought, actually, the final at the end of the book was not really planned when we started writing the book, because this came so unexpected. Not the death of my adoptive father, because he was already sick. I mean, he had cancer for a couple of years, and there were some complications, and I don't know whether I write it so explicitly, but he was paralyzed in the end. I don't know, did I write it? Didn't know.
You
So
mentioned his being in a wheelchair.
yeah, he was in a wheelchair then. So this was not something that came out of the blue. It was expected that his health will deteriorate. But nevertheless, it comes to all of us always as a sort of surprise that life ends for all of us. You keep on ignoring it, and at one point you can't ignore it any longer. And this was actually when he came to for his final days to the hospital. So this was not planned to be the end of the book, but this was such an essential experience, because I had never experienced death in that way before. I didn't know that someone passed away, but I was never present. And I don't know, Rabbi Klaus, you probably are more familiar when you see suffering, real suffering, like from eye to eye. And when someone dies, especially when you're sick, this is not a happy place usually, because you want to find peace. But if everything hurts, then it's difficult. And when it hurts so much, you need to get medication, because otherwise you can't take it. And for example, with my this is a little bit too long, but anyhow, before he died, his lung collapsed. So we were there present when this happened, and this is really difficult to take. So what I wanted to share in the last chapter was how close we were, even though it was an adoptive family. I also posed in the very beginning of the 6th chapter, I asked, what is family? Is it something we inherit, or is it something we build? So, and I strongly believe that it's something that, yes, there are genetic facts, but it's something we built. And when we talked, Rabbi, about your community and the synagogue and life there, this is family. It's family that you built, and it's a family that you built by the good relationships that you have, by caring for each other, being together. So maybe this is even more important sometimes, I think. And therefore, I wanted in the 6th chapter really to share not only the experience, but also the family, how close we were, like gathering around him. And with my adoptive family at the moment, it's such. I mean, my adoptive mother is now a widow, so she's still living in the same house. It's a quite big house, but she wants to be there. She doesn't want to go anywhere else, and she lives about we don't see every day or every week. And my adoptive brothers, they take most of the time care of the daily things that she might need help. Let's say COVID now, who does the shopping, stuff like this. I try to do my part, because I know that I can't really help out there as much as I'd like. But my husband's side, my parents-in-law, they also need help. My father-in-law passed away from dementia 2 years ago. So my 1.5 years actually ago. So my mother-in-law is a widow as well. So what I can't do with my adoptive mother, I try to take more care of my mother-in-law. So it doesn't really matter where you give back or where you help, as long as you do. So that's what I do, and we are still close. But this is maybe something one also needs to add, is that although we were close, now having children myself, I know that the relationship was always good, but the relationship that I have with my own kids, as close as we are, we never reached that point. We never reached that point. but it's okay. That's not, I don't think it's, every relationship is different, but it's a good relationship.
Well, Jennifer, one of the things I got a lot of your book, so many things I got out of your book, but one of them was you mentioned relationships and how our relationships with even those closest to us aren't always so black and white. And for example, your relationship with Ruth, your grandmother, was so fascinating because you had so many you had memories with her, and yet this was a woman who loved Gert, right? And was able to live with among Gert all those years. And there's a good question I think really I open up to all of us. Is it possible to love one part of a person while rejecting another part? Were you all able to relate to that? Have you had experiences in your own life where you found out that a particular relative, maybe someone in your immediate family, did some things you weren't so happy about, but you still loved them? You still were able to have a relationship with them. What are your thoughts on that? Was that helpful to you? Some of the insight that Jennifer offered on her relationship with her grandmother, Ruth? Let me ask you guys another question then.
I think you should answer because this is really interesting.
I think there were lessons to be learned from that, because sometimes when you get very disappointed in a person, it's really hard to come back. And I think the growth that you showed during your journey was it was great that you could share it, so you could see how somebody handled it and how you knew at certain times that that was not the time to talk to your mother. You had to wait until you were truly able to speak to her. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize. There are times when you can do more damage when you're not ready to hear certain things, and you have to wait. So I was really glad to see that, and I was glad for you that you were able to grow in that way.
And not so easy. We're a very impatient world. You're right. Marcia?
Well, I'm going to put my feelings out there. I really found it very, very hard to follow your grandmother's love for Aman. That was a tough one. I read it. I can't say that I understand it. She seemed in the book to be either trying to be ignorant of what he's doing, putting it out of her mind, or maybe she really was ignorant. She certainly was attracted to him. And it also, then the question is, maybe he was a completely different person around her. Maybe she never ever saw that side. But so Rabbi, it's one thing to talk. We've all been in relationships with people. That's part of life where, I do things to disappoint others. They do things that disappoint me. This was, we have some things that Aman did are on the end of the spectrum. So I personally found it hard. I to accept her love for him. So I don't know how the rest of you felt.
Yeah, it'd be nice to think that we would know better than her and not stay with him or not even get together with him. But she did. I guess I wanted to give her some benefit of the doubt that maybe she was protecting the maids and trying to soften some of his evil ways, but I'm not sure how much she succeeded. I don't know. Maybe she succeeded a little bit.
I think our other Marsha, I saw that you wanted to, Marsha Turel, I see you. You also wanted to say something. Let us hear what you say.
Well,
it doesn't have to do with Amman per se, but when you were dealing with your friends who were the Israeli, Anat and Noah, and someone asked you, well, have you told them, when you were young, shortly after you found out about your grandfather, and you weren't ready to, and you thought to yourself how they would reject you because of their history living, especially living in Israel. But I like how well they accepted you, knowing you and having, been your friend for so many years, so that they said, no, that's not you. You're not your grandfather. I really liked how they um, supported you, when you finally did tell them. That's what, that clarity between when should I tell my friends, and you weren't ready to at that certain time, but then when you finally did reveal your family history, they were so supportive, and I loved that part.
Shall I say something?
Please.
I go back, I talk about my Israeli friends, but I wanted to talk about love first, because I think this is like a closed circle. Here I can say what I usually say. I want to make something really clear. When I talk about my grandmother and my love for my grandmother, this is really the feeling that I sort of kept from my earliest childhood. This is when I was 7 years old, when I saw my grandmother last. This was what I thought who she was. When I now look at her, I don't, I know that we need to be to forgive, but I think I believe in forgiveness, yes, but I believe in forgiveness only um, if you acknowledge what you did. It's a little bit like the Germans, our German past. The Germans, they have to acknowledge what happened. They can't run away from it. This is the baseline. This is from where we have to start. And when I look at my grandmother, uh, that's not the case. That's simply not the case. She did not acknowledge because she left a suicide note, as we all know. I wrote it, and she did not acknowledge. So this is one thing. You need to forgive. You need to acknowledge what you did. This is the first thing. About love, I described it once, or I said love for my children, for example, whatever they would do, they are my children. So there's a bond that is stronger than everything. It wouldn't say that I excuse everything, but it's a bond because I'm their protector. I'm their mother. This is who I am. This is my job in life, to be there for them and actually I have to say, in very, very unusual, let's say, there might be circumstances it would go too far. I did a workshop for teachers in Germany, and I showed them a video of a girl that was abused, very, very badly abused in early childhood, and she lacked empathy because she never learned what empathy is. I mean, she grew up in circumstances that I don't want to tell you, so undescribable. And she was later a psychiatric case because she started to injure or to attack her brothers and sisters in the foster family where she came. And they had to really try to find a solution because they didn't want to bring her back into the different care, but they just couldn't take her because she was a danger for her siblings. So anyhow, I think there are circumstances when you lack empathy. This is not something that you're responsible of, but this is because you never had a model, something, where you could learn it. But when I see my grandmother, I mean, she is not, you can't give her that excuse. And as I always say, I think, yes, she might have done some good things with the maids and protected them in some way or the other, but that's not enough. And she must have seen how he treated, or Amun-Gurt treated them, and it was a daily experience. And look at yourself. I mean, when you surround yourself with people, you see how people are. I mean, it's a very simple example, but go to a restaurant with people, see how they treat the people who serves them food. It says a lot about people. It says a lot about people, because this is in the small little things you see everything. And with my grandmother living in the same household, I don't think he ever said thank you or please when he asked Helen to do something. So this is already a sign that he's not treating people in a good manner. And okay, this is just the tiny little things. But I'm sure that, and this is also not what I invent here now, but in the household, Helen was punished, you know, she was treated badly. That's a fact. So she must have seen this. And now the question about love. So I do think that one can love someone, maybe if you don't see this in the very beginning because you don't know a person. So you can maybe fall in love to someone. But on the long run, if you see how someone is, if you see his character, and as I said, you see the character in these small things, then you need to find out how to behave or how to deal with such a person. And you have two options. The one option is you see what someone is doing and you try to influence him and say, you know, that's not okay, you have to act differently. And if someone is not, and if it's not small things, you know, like really major things, you have to pack your stuff and leave. That's simple as that. It's very, very, very simple. And I do think that love, and to this word, I mean, I was also, as every one of us, probably quite often disappointed also with men or stuff like this. But, you know, it's always the question, you make a mistake, but how do you deal with the mistake? And if someone is doing something that hurts you, you have to see if he's trying to erase it, or to the mistake that he did to do something good, you know, to I don't know how you say in English the word, you know what I mean, right? So
Repentant.
if you do something good, yeah, ask for forgiveness, do something, act accordingly, that you know that you deserve forgiveness. And if you don't, well, it's actually this very simple. So my grandmother and my grandfather, I don't think personally there's any excuse in staying. And I also think that I think you might be able to fall in love to someone because you don't know who he is in the beginning. But on the long run, if you're together with someone, I don't think how you can love someone who treats other people badly.
Well,
And
and
with my
Jennifer,
children, they also do their mistakes. And I have now so many years, sorry, to educate them. So I'm quite sure they will never fall into that range.
well, you brought up a good point. You know, in Judaism, the first step of what we call teshuvah, making repentance, is to acknowledge your mistake. That's the first step. And I like what you said. That's the first step. And you mentioned your grandmother, even in her suicide note, didn't acknowledge it. Dan, you had your hand up a moment ago.
Yeah, Jennifer, I'm going to admit to you first that I have not read your book, but I'm going to at this point. And I hope this is a relevant comment, but you mentioned several times forgiveness, and I take it that's a major theme of your book. So I was always confused by the term. People would say, well, I have forgiven, but I cannot forget. And I never understood what that meant, because there are things that I have done and things that have been done to me that as long as I remember it, there's not going to be any forgiveness. And then a good friend of mine recently taught me that I'm not hearing the end of the sentence. I can forgive you, but I will never forget what you're capable of doing. And once you get that, and once I got that in my head, that as long as I understood the relationship I now have with this person who's hurt me, that I'm going to forgive them, and I'm going to move forward. I'm not going to end the relationship, but I will always know what they're capable of doing. And if I can get that in my head, I can build a new relationship, as you're pointing out, of love. But that's just a lesson I recently learned, and it's been very profound for me. So I wanted to share it. Thank you.
On a going in relationship with your eyes wide open. Now, Morris.
Kind of like Reagan's old, what was it? Trust but verify.
Yeah. Morris, you had your hand up.
Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. I also did not read your book, but I recently watched your YouTube interview with Peter Craven. I don't know when that was conducted. The date on it was 2013, so that's when it was posted. And learned a lot about you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very inspired. I'm involved with many of the activities of March of Life based in Tübingen. Are you familiar with that organization?
Yeah.
So I've been on many of their marches, including the 2018 March of the Nations in Jerusalem, and that's just amazing. And just for everyone's knowledge, briefly, it consists primarily of current young adults in Germany who are genuinely sorry for what their grandparents did, and are making amends. Oh, sorry. and slicha, and are doing the best to make amends for what they did very actively, the combating Jew hatred and anti-Semitism. And we all know what's going on with resurgence, but that's not part of this discussion. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And while I'm thinking about it, I don't know if I'll get another chance to talk, but I am not sure, but which camp. I was born either in Plaszow or one of the area camps, 1 week after the liberation of the camps in that area. And I'm still trying to find out exactly where I was born. So I'm starting to do some serious research now, even at my advanced age, to try to figure that out. But thank you so much for sharing the story. I'm very inspired by your story.
That's amazing. I didn't know that, Morris. So you may have been born there. That's incredible.
Well, I'm not sure specifically which camp, but it was in that area on the opposite side of Krakow from Auschwitz. There were several camps, and many Jews at the end of the war after liberation moved around from camp to camp. And I'm so sorry that I've not talked more to my mother
about what happened. Well, speaking of mothers, I'll open the floor up for discussion about Jennifer's mother, who I thought was a very fascinating character in the book, kind of that link between the generations. And I think the question that kept on going through my mind is why she put you up for adoption. And I thought, this is nothing new here, but I guess one obvious answer, maybe it's the obvious answer, is that she was trying to hide what happened from you, Jennifer. Maybe it wasn't that she couldn't handle having you, but she was trying to stop it and hoping you would never find out where you really came from. But what are your thoughts about Jennifer's mother and why she may have put her up for adoption? What do y'all think?
I think she couldn't deal with it. She was having enough trouble handling life herself. And she felt that it was better for her daughter to go with a family who could give her constant, consistent love and support. And she couldn't, she understood what she was capable of, and she was not capable of raising a child at that stage in her life. So I think I haven't finished reading the book. I'm 3/4 of the way through, but I got the impression that she did it because she really knew herself and that she was unable to deal with raising a child at that point in her life.
Other thoughts? Is it okay for us to judge her or kind of let her off the hook?
I don't think it's our place. I think it's Jennifer's
Right.
place to feel how she feels towards her own mother as we feel towards our own. I think when you read a book, you have your thoughts, but it's not our place to judge it. And my other question is, in the book, you met her maybe 7 years ago, according to the book, 7 or 8 years ago when you saw her. Have you seen her since?
Well, no, I haven't. And I actually have a question for you, Rabbi, because it's something that I was thinking about quite a lot. I told you that my mother's birthday was, right? Last week. So I usually, as I said, I do it more from a distant perspective. I talk about it because I want to educate people, but sometimes it's sort of coming back when these like family events or stuff like this, when it's more personal. I was really interested and curious what you think about her, because you said you're not to judge, but Margie, I know that you're not to judge, but what is your impression just from the outside? What would you say? Would you say she handled it in a responsible way, or what is your feeling towards my mother?
If it was my mother, I don't think I'd want a relationship at all. Not for the fact that the fact that she couldn't understand, and I don't feel when you did meet her as an adult that she could ever understand children or be a grandmother to your children. And I know, like my son and my grandsons, especially my son first. If I couldn't be there for him, and I still am at my age, and my son's not young, he's probably your age or older, and I wouldn't want a relationship because I don't want to put my family through that. I mean, I feel like I was a single mother almost all my son's life, except for the first year of his life. And I feel like I was his protector and at times still am. So I wouldn't want something that he would try to have a relationship only because it was a grandmother, but there would be nothing. And I think it would be tearing apart my son or my grandsons. It's like my grandsons have never met my son's real father.
Mm-hmm. Sort of
he has chosen never to want to meet his grandchildren. Maybe when he's ready to die, he will, but it will mean nothing to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been a part of his life this whole time. I mean, I moved to Houston 3 months before my first grandson was born because my son didn't have that feeling. And my grandsons know that I'm there for them. So I don't think I would want to put them through, my son or my grandchildren, through that.
You're a positive example. Any other thoughts, Marsha? Yeah.
Lynn, I agree with you. I don't think, was her name Monica, your mom's name? Okay, Monica was in any shape to raise a baby, a child at that time. At the same time, she put you in a Catholic orphanage, and I thought you related very eloquently your tie to this specific nun, young nun at the time, who became kind of a surrogate mother to you. But you also talked through the eyes of a very, very young child what it felt like when other family members were coming to the orphanage, and I don't know if they were taking the children out, doing things, and your mom didn't, she skipped weeks, and that, Margie, I agree with you. Who are we to judge? Absolutely, but it must have hurt a lot.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly why your mother lapsed in meeting you regularly, but you talked about it in a heartfelt way, and I was sorry.
Okay, I answer quickly because it's really an open question. I don't, there are two elements in the relationship with my mother. Your question, Jennifer, I don't see her, but this is not my decision. I always wanted to be in contact, and she cut ties. It's the story is too long, but she simply decided she doesn't want to have contact. So I don't even know whether she read the book. She knew that I'm going to write a book. She was really upset about it. Actually called my adoptive parents, shouted on the telephone really, really badly. And this was the last time any of our family, me or my adoptive parents or anyone heard from her in this context. But um, I have a sister, a half sister. You remember Charlotte in the book? Okay. So there are two elements, I would say, and this is my question to you, Rabbi, because I think I went really a long way forgiving my mother what she did to me. Because as we said before, if someone acknowledged what he did, then it's for me okay. I can forgive almost everything what someone did to me, because I also understood it, and I always gave her the credit that I said, okay, she didn't know any better. She was not in the position to do so. So this is why she acted the way she did. Okay, so that's okay. But then there's the other element, and this is my sister. And for me, it's easier to forgive someone for something that he did to me than to something that he did to someone else. Because if I see it from the outside, I see how wrong it is. And with my sister, I mean, just for those who haven't read the book, my sister, because very quickly she has a sort of stable life, as stable as one could say with what she experienced, but she is not using drugs anymore. She has a family. But my mother and her, they have also a non-existent relationship. And my mother never acknowledged that part of why my sister became, let's say, was in the situation that she was, the drug addiction and everything that came then, was because of how she grew up. And let's remember, my mother did one mistake a couple of times. The mistake, for example, that she was together with an abusive man. I mean, she decided to be together with the man, and she decided to have a child. And so she exposed my sister to the surrounding, and now she doesn't take responsibility for why my sister has these problems. And this is very, very difficult for me to forgive. And to be honest, I'm not ready to forgive her. I can forgive her what she did, but I see this is a long, long story when I'm in contact with my sister. So I just know also a lot of things, how she grew up, stuff like this. And if I hear it, I really try. And I went such a long way of forgiving her what she did to me. And I really think I'm okay with it, really. But if I see, and this is again, if I see that someone doesn't learn, I mean, she's younger than I am, that she's doing, and now there are great grandchildren involved again, it's a generational thing. If I see that she's repeating mistakes, and she didn't learn her lesson, and there are more victims due to because she didn't learn her lesson. And this is really something I'm struggling with, because ultimately this is something that holds me back. I mean, I would talk to her, but since I am not in contact, to forgive. And yeah, it's very difficult. What would you say? I mean, it's one case, but it's probably in a different setting, things that we all struggle with. How can we do?
Well, it's a big struggle, and you're under no obligation to forgive her because she hasn't acknowledged her mistake, especially how she raised your half sister. And she hasn't come forward and sought repentance. So you're under no obligation. I think the challenge is to go on, and as you've done and you've beautifully shown through your book, is to be able to proceed with your life and be able to raise your children differently in a more, certainly in a loving home, and which your mom, like, to her credit, realized she couldn't provide that, but didn't provide it to your sister either. And
I think maybe it's time. With my sister, we said, I mean, my mother is really old now, and she's not going to have years to come. I mean, hopefully she's good health, but she's 75, so this will end. And we were thinking, because she beautifully took care of her father, who was so abusive, my sister, and he's, okay, this is really private, okay, we're in a small room. And he then said to her, he thought that at the end of his life, no one would be there. And that she took care of him was so surprising for him. So I thought about, when our mother dies and really wants to see us, I hope she wants, I would be able to go there. And if she would say she's sorry, I have no problem forgiving her for everything. But she needs to say, I'm sorry.
yeah, it doesn't sound like she's capable.
No.
Unfortunately.
Okay.
Unfortunately, and it's complicated. It's hard, and I know that's a lot. That's a difficult thing to digest for you, Jennifer.
I think you were lucky that your mother decided to bring you over to the group where you were to be adopted, and saw to it that you got adopted by a good family.
Yeah.
As opposed to remain under her care, because you've turned out to be an incredible woman in terms of your ability to understand things, to seek things out, and appear to be extremely well adjusted. I mean, what you've shared within there is just like heartbreaking, but it's helpful to see, because it's a process you have to go through with something as awful as you finding out what you did about your father. And just how you handled it is a great lesson to others and how to handle similar situations. So thank you for writing your book.
Thank you. But I think, and this is to you, Rabbi, again, I actually think, or my conclusion to all this is, this was not my mother's, the credit. I don't give the credit to my mother, sort of, that she gave me to the orphanage, and okay, but I give credit to faith. I really think this was faith.
Okay.
That ultimately made my life going into a different direction than, let's say, my sister. Because it was not, my mother did not take responsibility, like in a serious sort of way, because otherwise she would have not taken the same path with my sister. So I give credit to faith, because I say, maybe there's something bigger, that was somehow made her make the decision. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think so. I truly think so. Over the years, I more and more thought that faith is, whatever however you call it, is something that is the engine of our life.
Yeah.
Joseph's brother sold him into slavery, and he forgave them. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Judy, you have your hand. Do you have your hand up? Okay. Margie?
You also put in your book about the way you feel towards the love towards a man. First, it was a boyfriend, but you must have a very strong, wonderful husband who supported you through all of this. You're still together. You must have an unbelievable love for your husband as much as your children.
How honest should I be in a small group?
Sure.
Well, it's about, when you ask about forgiveness, My husband would be one of the people who needs forgiveness from me. And actually, I decided to end my marriage, which doesn't mean that I don't forgive him, because things sometimes are complicated. And I really hope to stay good friends, and we are a family. But as you said, it's very, very, very complicated, you know. And sometimes you do things where you don't want to hurt someone and it still hurts. Then I think you can be able to forgive if someone is doing something not intentionally to hurt you, because it's a mistake. If you do a mistake with no intention to hurt the other, because this was not the reason, then you can forgive. But sometimes then you have to go a different or separate ways.
Sorry. I'm sorry that that happened. How are your children?
Very well, because they just say that most important is that both are happy, and as long as it stays family. And I always think, you know, even if you go maybe a separate way, sort of, it's also what you can teach your children. If you have a difficult situation, how you deal with the situation, how how this is the example that you can set. You know, see that you might have difficulties with the parents, but they stay your parents. They love you and they also respect each other, and they just, you know, I don't know. It's like, even if you're not husband and wife, so let's say if you're brother and sister, or if you're friend and another friend, it doesn't mean just because that relationship did not last for what reason so ever, that you can't have a really good relationship and be respectful with each other. And this is what I try to do, and what we both try to do. So I don't think that the children, they are much older now, that they will learn the lesson of how to treat a difficult situation in a good, respectful way, and stay friends. And this is what I can teach them. So you have to be flexible.
Yeah. Look, and I hope and pray it continues, but you're right. It's setting that example for your children. So in our closing minutes, any last questions that you may have for Jennifer? Jennifer, I'm sorry, Marcia, go ahead.
Okay, well, this may be too big a question for 3 minutes, but I'll let you decide. Do you, Jennifer, believe that Aman had free will all along the way to stop, change his behavior? Or do you think he had become so conditioned to the killing and the abuse that at some point there was no way he was going to change? That's a big question in a small amount of time.
A very quick, very straight, very simple answer.
Okay.
He had free will.
He had
And
free will, you
yeah,
believe? Okay.
he had free will, and he chose to do what he did. So he's responsible, and this is why he was executed.
As a rabbi, I would second that. I agree. You know, we're all born with free will, no matter where we come from. And he was an evil man. And it's unfortunate he got away with so many crimes before he was finally executed. What is amazing to me is that, Jennifer, I think you've set the example on how to acknowledge the trauma of family from the past, make amends, deal with it, and set a new course for your family. And that's why I think your book has caught on across the world, because I think it's a lesson that all of us can take. And each of us has our own family traumas. And the question is how we deal with it and how we make sure that those traumas don't get passed on. As we say in Judaism, lador vador, from generation to generation. And, you know, I'm a survivor. I'm a third generation survivor. My grandmother was in the camps, and it still affects our families to this day. She passed away 25 years ago, but it still affects our family. And it's how we make peace with it and how we move on and how we grow from it. And you've set a great example for us. You really have. we're appreciative of that.
We have 1 minute because one thing I wanted to say, this is what I do. I also I always see myself as a grassroots activist. So what I did so far, but I'm more going to do it on a broader scale, I would say, in the future, what I do, because I get involved with some other institutions as well, because I think what I do is in a microcosm is dealing with your past. It's important because you can't run away. I mean, I really know I'm the expert on knowing that you can't run away from your past. But I think if you make it, enlarge it, this is true for the individual, but this is also true for society. And if you look at the German past, this is what we were forced to do, but we needed to do. We had, of course, help. We had support after the Second World War. People, I mean, let's say the US, but also other forces who told us that we need to acknowledge what we did. The Nuremberg trials, everything, but it's much more than the Nuremberg trials. It's how it's now implemented in the history lessons for every German school kid. You know, this is part of our identity. It became part of our DNA, but in the sense that we really had to look at it, to work things through. And on the broader sense, so what I say individually, what you have to do, and you have to do it because one day you'll die. I mean, we all know, and really try to start early, you know, not to run away from your own past. But it's the same for countries. It's the same, let's say, what I think regarding to Germany, you have a complete different situation in the US. But to reconcile with your past, and it's not just the word slavery and Black Lives Matters or the monuments or Montgomery, it's so much more. Now also the last four years. I mean, I feel when I also talk with my friends, I mean, this is a country that is deeply traumatized. My friends, they are traumatized. It's like half of the country is traumatized. They are half of the country is in a state of depression or was in a state of depression and they're still traumatized. So it's one aspect, but as I said, you can go much further back. Let's go back to slavery and so on and so forth. To deal with the past, it's really something that is crucial. It's crucial for the individual, but also for society. And in Israel, again, for the victims in Israel, from a completely different point of view, the silence of the victims, they don't talk. It's also so important to reconcile in so far to open, if you are able to, you know, and sometimes it's too painful, but to share with your grandchildren, to share with your children. And Morris, I mean, you said, you know, your mom passed away, she couldn't tell you. If you're able to, if you're strong enough, you know, to share your inner world, this is what the world needs, to share this and have a dialogue. Because I always say that pain, or when you experience pain, it's not very comfortable in the beginning. Yeah, and we want to run away from it, but you need the pain because the pain leads to compassion. And when you have compassion, this is the difference between empathy, which is only to mirror something, you know, because you can be, empathy is mirroring someone, you do the same things or feel the same things. And if it's combined with compassion, this is a tool, and it's not a tool, just it's also a political tool. Because this is ultimately maybe more successful than laws and other things, because this binds society together.
Well, look, you're speaking like a rabbi, Jennifer. You were so right. You know, and part of being Jewish is to remember, is Yizkor, is to remember, so it spurs us to action. And it's a big part of being Jewish. That's why we have so many holidays that commemorate some really negative things at times. And we do it, so it will spur us to action. Jennifer, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and for all you're doing for the world and for the Jewish people. And we hope to have you again. Please don't be a stranger. You have a home here at Beth Yeshurun, and love to see you in the future here in Texas. And Best of luck. Only blessings. Stay safe, and all the best of luck in continuing your story.
Thank you.
See you again, and I wish you all the best. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Marsha.
That was great. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
All the best.